It's my pleasure on behalf of the Office of Child Care National Center on After-School and Summer Enrichment, or NCASE, to welcome you to today's panel discussion on combining resources to support quality out-of-school time programs. I'm Siobhan Braiding, and as part of Truth and Reconciliation, I would like to acknowledge that I'm participating from EDC headquarters in current-day Waltham, Massachusetts, which is located on the unceded lands of the Pawtucket and Massachusetts peoples who continue to live and thrive in this area. As you're joining, please introduce yourself in the chat and let us know your role and from where you're participating. It's wonderful to see folks from Arkansas, West Virginia, Washington State, Ohio, Utah, the Reno Sparks Indian Colony in Nevada, and folks just from all across the country. Thank you so much for joining us today. Many of you are likely familiar with NCASE, but for those that aren't, NCASE is part of a national training and technical assistance network funded by the Child Care and Development Fund, or CCDF, which is administered by the Office of Child Care under the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. This network of national centers supports states, territories, and tribes in implementing CCDF to provide low-income families who are working or participating in education with help paying for childcare. I'm joined today by my NCASE colleagues, Nina Stanton and Mary Colleton, and we're also pleased to have Julie Ingersoll from our sibling TA center, the National Center on Subsidy, Innovation, and Accountability, NCSIA, with us today. Now I'd like to welcome our panelists today. We have Ebony Grace, who's the Chief Executive Officer of NJSAC, which is New Jersey's After School and Out of School Time Professional Network. We have Nicole Miller, who's the Executive Director of Vermont After School. And we have Helen Mattes, who's an Early Childhood and After School Systems Specialist with the Child Development Division at the Vermont Department of Children and Families. And they're going to share practical examples from work in their states today. So during today's session, we will understand funding sources that can be combined to support school-age childcare, explore strategies for blending, braiding, and layering funds, and you'll have an opportunity to share your examples as well as learning from our panelists about their examples. Now we'd like to hear from you. Mary, can you please launch our polls? There are actually 3 questions, so you will need to scroll down to see them all. The first question is what best describes your role, and then if you say other, there's a second question which asks us to try to categorize yourselves under one of the types of other roles. And the third question is, what is your level of knowledge or awareness on the topic for today's session? So we'll give folks a couple minutes to answer this, and then we'll check the results. And let's see, we have right now we have a lot of folks from CCDF lead agencies, both state and tribal. We have a lot of folks from school age networks, and we have quite a few program directors and program staff. Okay, why don't we go ahead and end the poll, Mary, so we can see the results. Okay, so you can see we have a great mix of folks today. That's always excellent. We have our CCDF lead agency staff, state education staff, licensing, tribal CCDF staff. We have a couple of folks from Regional Office of Child Care and CCR&Rs, National After School Association and School Age Networks, a lot of program providers, staff, and directors. And then thank you for giving us more specificity if you did say other. And finally, we have a mixture of the largest response was folks are moderately aware of this topic today, combining resources to support quality out of school time programs, followed by minimally aware, very aware, and not at all aware. So that's a great mix. Thank you so much for doing that. And now I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Nina, who is one of the co-authors of the brief and will be sharing some of the content with us. Let me just get to your slide, Nina.
Well, thanks, Siobhan. I'll go ahead and get started as you're doing that. Yeah. And judging from the results, a lot of you will be very familiar with this content already, but we want to give you an overview so that we can get to the real exciting part, which is the real world examples that we're going to hear on our panel. So we will be sharing some of the research and resources and strategies from the brief that appears on your screen. And Mary's going to put a link to that in the chat for you all. So if you haven't seen it yet, you'll be able to access that. So the cost of providing quality out of school time care, as you all know, vary widely based on a number of factors, including the hours and days of program operation, the ages of children and youth served, the location and the type of the program, the activities offered, and the staff to youth ratio. And despite historic public interest and investment levels, out of school time programs remain under-resourced and reliant on non-public funding sources. As you can see at the top of this list on the slide, 42% of providers surveyed by the After School Alliance reported parent fees as a primary funding source. Other major sources cited in the survey included private donations and fundraisers, 21st Century Community Learning Centers grants, and foundation and philanthropic funds. Interestingly, providers cited the Child Care and Development Fund, or CCDF, and other public funding sources less frequently. That said, CCDF is the largest national child care subsidy program supporting low-income families. Yet, as we just saw in those survey results, these subsidies are only one part of the funding picture for out-of-school time programs. Out-of-school time programs that serve low-income children and youth typically meet their budgets by combining resources from multiple funding streams. These may include federal programs that reach out-of-school time providers through state, territory, tribal, or local agencies. For example, CCDF child care subsidies and CCDF quality improvement funds, which flow down from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, 21st Century Community Learning Center funds, which flow down from the U.S. Department of Education, subsidized meal programs such as the Child and Adult Care Food Program from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, temporary assistance for needy families, or TANF funds, again from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, and school district allocations, including funds from Title I and Title IV Part A of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, as amended by the Every Student Succeeds Act. Now, a lot of folks are familiar with Title I. If you're not as familiar with Title IV-A, it's also called the Student Support and Academic Enrichment Program. And these funds all share a common purpose: improving access to quality services for low-income children and families. And so they're likely to have similar guidelines and eligibility requirements, whether those requirements are at the program level or the individual level. Because they flow down from the federal government through other government agencies, though, keep in mind that these funds might be called by different names when they reach out-of-school time program providers. For example, where I live in Kentucky, the CCDF program is called the Child Care Assistance Program, or CCAP. And so that's how providers here identify those funds. Some other possible out-of-school time resources may include targeted public or private funding designed to address specific needs. For example, funds for special populations like English language learners and highly mobile youth like migratory children, youth experiencing homelessness, and youth in foster care. Funds for specific purposes, such as to support children's mental and social emotional health, reduce and prevent youth violence and risky behaviors, promote STEM learning, engage youth with the arts, culture, and the environment, offer professional training and advancement for out-of-school time staff to support staff recruitment and retention, or to enhance program facilities, materials, play spaces, or curricula. It can also include funds for programs like AmeriCorps and AmeriCorps Vista that support people-powered solutions, and place-based funds for community development, such as Promise Neighborhoods funding from the U.S. Department of Education and community development block grants from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. As you can see, there's an array of possible funding sources out there. Understanding the alignment and the opportunities for alignment between each of these funding streams guidelines and the out-of-school time program goals can help out-of-school time leaders access a broader range of funding sources. So Mary, can you please launch our next poll? And we'd like to know from all of you, which of the funding sources that I just mentioned have you used to support out-of-school time? Again, there are several choices, so you might need to scroll down to see them all. And if you select other, please use the chat to let us know what other funding resources you've been accessing. And Mary, I'm going to ask you to kind of monitor how we're doing on responses and let me know when we'd like to see the results.
Of course.
So I see some folks are just getting started thinking about out-of-school time. So this is a great opportunity to hear from your colleagues about new resources that you might not have thought about. Partnership with local tribal health organization. That's fantastic. And we didn't really mention health in this list, but that's a great resource. All right, Mary, would you like to share what we've got so far?
Sure, we have 76 out of 126.
Okay, so we'll just give another 15 seconds or so. You can continue to chat if you've got other sources that you want to share with your colleagues. You know, you can continue to put those in the chat. Oh, that's great, April. So she said her tribal health organization allows them to choose what to use the funding for. Yeah, Thomas mentioned that family fees were the main source of funding, but since the pandemic, it's been challenging for people to pay those fees.
Nina,
Okay, so let's take a,
somebody also mentioned local grant opportunities a bit farther up in the chat.
yeah, and that's a really good, it's a really good point, because those can come from all sorts of, you know, all sorts of sources, local foundations, you know, local corporations and small businesses. There are lots of potential sources that are available to you in your community that may not be on this list, which is admittedly quite big. All right, so can we see the results, please, Mary?
Sure.
All right. So it looks like, not surprisingly, given the audience, there's kind of a big three. 21st Century Community Learning Centers has the most. Childcare subsidies from CCDF, CACFP and other subsidized meals, got school district allocations, and we're getting some good other examples. I'm really glad to see 15% of you said you're using AmeriCorps or AmeriCorps Vista, and 23% said community development funds. That's really nice. All right. Well, as you have experienced in your own work, all of you, combining funds from public and private sources can be complex, in large part due to the differing eligibility, tracking, and reporting requirements. The coordination of multiple funding streams is described in the literature and in practice using various terms such as blending, braiding, layering, cost allocation, or cost sharing, and those all have similar but distinct meanings. So I want to talk briefly about the first three. First, blending, which is sort of commingling or smooshing together multiple funding streams for one purpose without continuing to track the different individual sources. So you're not keeping those, the identity of the funds separate. You're just kind of putting them all together for a single purpose. And as you might imagine, that gets more complicated when programs have different eligibility requirements for the recipients or end users. And while blending may be done at any level, it is easier at the government level where the funding entities themselves can collaborate to give local programs greater flexibility. Where you've got distinctions that require dollars to be spent on specific children, families, or actions, braiding may be a better option. And when funds from multiple sources are braided to cover the cost of services, each strand retains its own identity throughout the funding life cycle. For that reason, braiding requires precise tracking of funds to the child, family, or activity level to ensure that each dollar is used only for eligible purposes. And finally, layering is a method of stacking funds from different sources to pay for different services for the same child. One frequently cited example of this is the Early Head Start Childcare Partnerships model, which uses a three-layer structure to provide full-day, full-year, comprehensive early Head Start services to infants and toddlers in childcare settings. PCDS subsidies cover the basic childcare costs, that's the first layer. And then the Early Head Start Childcare Partnership Grant adds 2 additional layers. The second layer, which enhances the quality of childcare services to meet Head Start program performance standards, is unique because it benefits all of the children in the classroom. And then the third layer covers the comprehensive services for individual early Head Start eligible children. So now that we've given you an overview of some of the strategies for combining resources, we'd like to hear from our panelists about the work that they've been doing in their states to combine funds using these and other approaches. So I'm going to ask each panelist to briefly introduce themselves and at the same time to answer our first question, which is why they've chosen to combine funding resources to support out of school time. And we're going to start with Ebony.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I am Ebony Grace. Thank you, Nina. I appreciate it. I am the Chief Executive Officer of NJSAC. We're New Jersey's after school and out of school time professional network, and we work to provide training and technical assistance and professional development to licensed, subsidized, and 21st century providers and grantees throughout the state, as well as additional providers that are interested in participating in school-age services. And so for the first question, my apologies. For the first question, in terms of why we've combined our resources, and really for us as a statewide after-school network, to maximize the provision of resources that we can provide to our New Jersey out-of-school time providers. So we have 2 main sources of our funding, the first being a technical assistance contract from the New Jersey Department of Human Services, their Division of Family Development, who administers subsidy funding to provide technical assistance and training to licensed and subsidized school-age providers, as well as providers or organizations looking to start a new program and helping them to navigate through licensing regulations and subsidy requirements. In addition, we receive a grant from the New Jersey Department of Education to serve as the technical assistance provider for the 21st Century Community Learning Centers grants. Similarly, to provide professional development, technical assistance, quality coaching, as well as to partner with the Department of Education to coordinate different federal requirements required of the department itself and then the 21st century grantees. So this position, this funding streams that we receive really allow us a wide view of the needs of our out-of-school time youth and providers through a state level lens. And so combining and braiding our funding in order to provide quality technical assistance is really why we take advantage of being able to braid those funds. Thank you, Nina.
Thank you, Ebony. And now, Helen, would you like to say hello?
Sure. Hi. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Helen Attice, Early Childhood and After School Systems Specialist in the Child Development Division at with the state of Vermont. And so CDD oversees the comprehensive childcare services for the state and therefore CCDF funding. And so for this first question, I'm going to pass it over to Nicole Miller, who's also with is from the state, is from Vermont, but our statewide after school network. So Nicole.
Good morning, everyone. As Helen said, I'm Nicole Miller. I'm the executive director here at Vermont After School, and we're the sister organization to Ebony's in New Jersey. And I know a bunch of our statewide after school network colleagues are on this call as well. So special hello to you all. So here in Vermont, we really take a big picture approach to after school and summer programming and also any other youth serving organizations. And so we have this wide tapestry of providers, including schools, nonprofits, municipalities, and private entities. And all of those are using a variety of funding sources, many of the ones that we've mentioned on this call already, including 21C, the CCDF, municipal funds, private grants, as well as Vermont has just launched a new state after school and summer funding through our Act 78 that is really working to build a system of universal after school and summer in this state. And so as the statewide after school network, we are working really hard to make sure that all of those providers have access to training, coaching, technical assistance, consultation, whatever they might need, honestly. Regardless of the funding they use. And we have a technical assistance grant through the Child Development Division, which is our work with Helen. And so we've been able to work with them to support licensed and regulated programs, as well as braiding funds with the Agency of Education to support the 21C grantees. We also receive a grant through the Department of Health that allows us to work on upstream primary prevention, much of which is the work that's happening in after school and summer programs. And so we focus on youth voice and some other pieces on that work as well. And so we have a public-private partnership and a cross-agency team that has been meeting for a few years now. That includes the head of agencies from the Agency of Education, Child Development Division, Department of Health, Mental Health, Agency of Commerce and Community Development, a whole bunch of folks to really be overseeing this work and making sure that we're making our progress towards universal after school and summer. Thanks.
That's a lot. Well, thank you, Nicole. I think it's always good to understand the why behind the work before you start talking about the how. But now we'd like to hear a little bit about your how. So Nicole, can you tell us a little bit about how Vermont and all of you working together have combined resources for out of school time programs?
Absolutely. I'm going to talk specifically about the statewide after school network, our organization. And so through our technical assistance grants with the Child Development Division, with the Agency of Education, Department of Health, as well as private funds, we are able to offer a wide range of technical assistance to those programs and those professionals running them. We really have a lot of flexibility. I'm really grateful for that in order to make sure that we're touching on all aspects of quality programming, including social emotional learning, youth voice, curriculum, staffing and team development. I will say our Child Development Division grant also focuses on career pathways and connecting to the early childhood career pathways that are existing within the state. And our Agency of Education grant also has a special focus on leadership development, but the two of those are a little bit different. And so Yeah, I'll pause there, I think.
All right. How about you, Ebony?
Hi, so how have we combined resources? There's lots of different ways, and I'll just give 3 specific examples that we've done. One is with our New Jersey quality standards for after school, which has been a joint braiding of funding in order to develop and implement our quality standards. And so our quality standards have been adopted by the Department of Education 21st Century Office for Continuous Quality Improvement, and they've also been included in New Jersey's Workforce Registry, which is available to all licensed and subsidized, providers for program quality. And so for our quality standards for after school, there's 6 different standards of continuous program quality that any provider can use as a self-assessment tool to look at and see how they want to and in what ways they want to continue to improve the program quality that they have. And so we have specialists, both 21st Century and funded by DFD as well, that go out and walk the provider through the process, create an action plan, do observations, and then, come up with how do they want to address this. And it doesn't have to be all 6. And that's why it's a self-assessment tool, because it's really individualized to what each program and provider needs for themselves and for their program. And then at the end of the process, they do a post observation, and they talk about where they feel like they've done really well or where they feel like they still may need some challenges. And so that's been funded by both Department of Human Services, is subsidy funding and CCDF funding, as well as the Department of Education, who's also funded that over the years. Another example is our annual after-school conference, out-of-school time conference that we do every year. So funds from both state departments help to support our 2-day conference that serves out-of-school time providers throughout the entire state. And so it doesn't matter how they're funded, they're welcome to come. We have 2 days in Princeton, New Jersey, where we provide over 40 workshops, opening sessions, vendor showcase, and all of different resources that they may need in order to learn about new things and curriculum that they could walk away with and use to implement at their program as soon as possible. And then the last example I'll give is what we call the New Jersey School Age Equity Team. And so that actually came out of a PLC, a professional learning community that we did, and systems building and equity with NCASE. And so we decided to continue that work. And what we do is it is a collaboration. We have about 15 to 20 members now of all state level agencies, county level agencies, local level agencies, providers, school-based, state education agencies are also there. And we are just really working on 4 goals that are allowing us to combine resources. There's so many things that are happening at the state level and so many available resources that may not be easily accessible to providers, youth, family that are taking advantage of out-of-school time services. And so we want to be able to bring those things together, but then also identify challenges and gaps in services that may be occurring throughout the state.
That's exciting. And so I'm curious, what are some of the lessons that you've learned through the process of implementing those 3 examples and others about bringing funds together from different sources?
Collaboration is key. Absolutely. You must collaborate. You have to be open. You have to be flexible. There are so many moving parts at the state level that it's imperative for agencies to come together to partner in order to provide the most comprehensive quality services. And then also identify gaps in service, and then identify where there's gaps in not just service, but opportunity to have somewhere to put your child in a safe program and the out-of-school time hours. And I see the statewide after-school network, NJSAC, our role is to be, as a convener and a connector, of stakeholders. And so that's the biggest lesson learned. Like, we have to collaborate and we have to be open and be willing to be flexible.
I think that's true in almost everything we do, but especially so when you're trying to bring different funding sources and different agencies and entities together. You need everybody on the same page. Helen, what have you learned in these processes in Vermont?
Sure. So from the state's perspective and sort of my vantage point, we couldn't do what we do in Vermont without Vermont After School. They have been instrumental. Nicole and her staff bring issues forward to us, And so that's been really, really critical. And so we greatly appreciate that partnership. She keeps us on our toes. I mean, this is a real good working relationship in terms of being able to say, you know what, this is a working meeting. We just need to roll up our sleeves and figure this out. So that has really, really, that's been a huge lesson learned. And so, you know, where we are with in terms of braiding funding, we've really relied on, again, Vermont After School as that statewide after school network to do that hard work. You know, within agencies at the state level, it's really challenging because we have those regulations, and it's really we've really heavily relied on Vermont After School to help us with that. So that's been great. You know, I think that within CDD, we've done a little bit of braiding of dollars with regards to not only our CCDF dollars, we had obviously braided them with our ARPA dollars, but then also now we have a funding source through our Act 76, and that is really improving quality and capacity across the state. And so that's really helping us to braid those dollars for greater impact. What else would I say in terms of a lesson learned? It's really about relationships. And so the collaboration, that's critical, making sure that you're maintaining strong relationships, checking in with folks, that ongoing, you know, when it gets tough, when you have a good relationship with somebody, that's key. And so that's a huge lesson learned. And so that's what I'd share.
I completely agree. And I saw a lot of nodding from the panelists, and I'm guessing from the other participants as well. So Helen, in that spirit, what advice do you have for other folks who are out there thinking about combining resources to support out of school time, especially from that state level perspective? State agency perspective, I would say.
So in terms of so that advice, obviously, again, it's maintaining those relationships, staying at the table, having those regular meetings, so you can have those opportunities for those conversations to emerge. And so thinking about ways in which to continue to foster that. You know, I think about sort of who's on the call in terms of programs, making sure that they're connecting on an ongoing basis with their statewide network. And then their statewide network, making sure that they're continuing to maintain those strong relationships with those various agencies, so that there's that opportunity for as much combining of resources as that's possible. Sometimes it's thinking about, so while we might not be able to blend all the dollars, it's thinking about how we focus our grant so that it can be it can be targeted, right? Thinking about how can we be more intentional about serving XYZ population or specifically topic. What else do I think that's probably what I would share at this time. I'm also going to pass it over to Nicole, because from her perspective, I think she probably has some observations to share.
Thanks, Helen. I will just champion everything you said around communication, collaboration, as well as use these statewide after-school networks if you're not already using them. We really have a deep sense of what the field, where they're at, as well as where programs are getting services and where those are not happening yet, as well as where programs are missing. I'll also put a plug in. I know Ebony mentioned their quality guidelines for their state, and we also have those in Vermont, and they were co-created by Vermont After School, by the Child Development Division, and the Agency of Education. They don't replace any of those quality guidelines that exist within those funding sources, but they give us some common talking points. So as much as we can create that across the field is really something that feels helpful. So we have an aspirational vision of what high quality programs look like. And to that end, also, I'll also mention that both the 21st century programs as well as the licensed and regulated programs in the state use the program quality assessment tools out of the Weichert Center for Program Quality, which is, again, is another one of those examples of how and why and what advice I would say, like as much commonality as you can get across tools and talking points, the better for the field, because oftentimes they're braiding those funds as well. And so we can stop them from having multiple tools that they're having to implement.
That's great. Ebony, what advice do you have? And I will also point out, as you're getting started, if the three of you want to be thinking about a quick answer, we have a question in the chat about any ideas or tips for making these kinds of collaborations happen when you aren't getting your calls answered.
Absolutely. And so I'll answer that first. Ask your colleagues that are collaborating with you, because they may have contacts that you may not be aware of, or they may have I don't want to say loopholes, but different connections that may make connections to other places. So let's say, for instance, you're having a hard time getting through to the Department of Education, a particular office. Maybe if you have a relationship with the state education agency, like the Parents Association or the Principals and Supervisors Association, they may have a contact that you're not aware of that may already be open to the work. So that might be a way to kind of circumvent some difficulty in communicating with various other agencies. I mean, of course, other than including partners and collaborators, be very clear about the regulations of the different agencies and your level of service. And so as I was reading through the brief and understanding the difference between blending, braiding, and layering, I'm like, okay, what do we do as an agency? And we braid, because we as a contractor and as a grantee, because we compete for our technical assistance grant with the Department of Education, we have requirements that we have to make sure that we meet as well. And so you have to be very careful about making sure that you use all the funds appropriately and properly, and ask questions. Ask as many questions as you possibly can, because if you don't know what you don't know, for lack of a way of putting it. So, and the last thing I would say as advice is find examples of what you're trying to do in other places. So expand your network. I am a true believer in don't recreate the wheel if you don't have to, because there's so many resources out there, so many agencies like NCASE and other places that provide resources that it can save you time, it can save you heartache, it can save you a little difficulty to, and energy to handle those other challenges if you don't have to recreate the wheel and recreate something that may already exist that you can just revise for what you need for that purpose.
Fantastic. Thank you all so much. And now we have more questions in the chat, but I know we have other things to get to, so I'm going to hand it back to Siobhan for our next steps.
Thanks,
Siobhan,
Nina.
you may
Yes.
be unmute.
There
Yep.
she is.
Thanks, everybody. And thanks so much to our panelists. This was such a great and useful discussion. You were getting a lot of comments in the chat of support and gratefulness, and just really appreciate you sharing what you are doing and how you're doing it, and giving specifics, because that's really what's the most useful to colleagues. We appreciate the opportunity to bring folks together and to share some background knowledge, like about the different types of funding that Nina's been sharing. And it's just great to have an opportunity to have a panel sharing what you're really doing every day. So thank you for that. And now we'd like to hear from our participants. We're going to use a Padlet with these discussion questions. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to ask Preeti to share the Padlet on the screen, and Mary is also putting the link in the chat. And Preeti is just going to quickly show you, if you haven't used Padlet before, how you add a comment.
Thank you, everyone. So hopefully you are seeing the Padlet on your screen. There are 4 questions that we want to get your feedback on. If you're not familiar to Padlet or new to Padlet, if you would like to respond to one of the questions, right under the question, you will see a little plus. If you click on that plus, it'll open up a dialog box. And in that box, you can type your answer. I'm just going to type test and select publish. It might ask you to give yourself a name, which is always really cool. But then you will see your response. And once you see it for other participants, if you really liked what you read, you can give it a like by clicking the little heart. And also, if you'd like to comment on it, you can type your comment and select the arrow, and it will post your response. So I'm going to delete what I've added I don't want to deter from your comments. But yes, we invite you to respond to the questions. And if you have, if you're not able to access it, or if you're having any challenges, please feel free to indicate your responses in the chat. We'll continue to look there also. Can see from the top that some people are joining, which is wonderful. And some responses are coming in. I'll refresh periodically just in case if there's anything.
So we have about 12 minutes to do this. So, take your time and your thoughts, and we'll give you some quiet time to just add your thoughts and what to share. We really want to hear from you, answering basically the same questions that our panel responded to, in addition to asking about information or information that could assist you additionally. So we're going to stop talking. I'm going to start sharing some of the responses that folks have been putting in here while you're still writing. There's a lot of examples of how people have combined resources, which I'm reading through because they're very detailed, which is great. One of the one comment is 2 of our biggest efforts of combining resources have been in the revision of our after-school quality standards and hosting an after-school quality conference that we were able to provide free for 120 plus after-school providers. That's very exciting. Thank you for sharing that. Another comment is that we have combined resources in the past, but there wasn't necessarily a structure to how we combine them. I think a lot of what the program did was previous to restructure and restaffing. So we were making our programming fit the funding instead of making the funding fit our program. Okay, that's an interesting perspective. And somebody else commented that's really insightful. Somebody else noted, and I think this builds on what all of our panelists were saying, and specifically Ebony's response to the question about how to help make contacts if you feel like you're not connecting with the right folks. Somebody says that they've made contacts through face-to-face meetings, door knocking, providing resources in areas that were needed, showing up at all events pertaining to my area of expertise, and doing follow-ups. Absolutely. And Nina, feel free if you'd like to share some of the comments too, because we have plenty of them.
Yes, it's hard to keep up, which is exciting. I've been sort of bouncing around as the comments have come in. So I was looking at it, there were several comments in the what advice do you have question about sustainability and the importance of, you know, not just, I think it speaks to the example you just gave, not just chasing, you know, every funding source, but making sure that, you know, are they sources you can keep going back to? Are they sources that are going to be there for the long haul? Because you don't want to have to keep remaking your program over and over. And someone suggested have at least one continuous resource of funding and then braid others in to support gaps. So that way you can layer on quality resources, you know, resources to support quality, to support special activities or approaches, but you've always got that underlying source. And I think that's kind of similar to that layering model with the early Head Start programs, where they have the child care subsidies, the CCDF subsidies as the baseline, and then they have other pieces layered on top from, you know, in that case, it's one other grant source, but you could do it with all kinds. Somebody else suggested start from the highest award or the most strict, and then work the others in. And I think that's a really good strategy. That also is a good strategy for things like licensing and quality too.
Great. I see some under what advice do you have for others who want to combine resources to support OST? Meet with partners in advance to make sure you're aligned when capturing participant performance goals, right? Really important to have goals that are aligned, that are in line with what all of the partners are interested in. I noticed that another one was don't be afraid to invite everyone to the table for an informal discussion. We've had some successful goal setting and alignment over coffee with no agenda. So that's another interesting approach, sort of a more informal session first that can then lead into something more formal, you know, like goal alignment.
And Siobhan, there's another one in the advice section that I think really is a good companion to that one, which is to get to know the partners and how they operate before you go in to have the how can we collaborate conversation, because you need to understand what they're doing, why they're doing it, how they're doing it, what challenges they're facing before you start talking about, you know, let's do this together, because that may be coming from your lens of what you need and not taking their needs and approaches into account.
That's a really important one. I'm looking under additional information that would help folks to combine resources. We have outcomes, concrete examples of metrics and measures used to prove program success. How were these determined? How were these calculated? And I see Nicole from Vermont After School has a response to some of the ways that they do that. Thank you, Nicole. Ongoing opportunities to build connections outside of my state to promote what I do, and then hopefully that will carry on to the entities in my state. Right, so that's an interesting perspective. You're working within your state or territory context, but also, you know, reaching out more broadly.
So this is an interesting one in the additional information question. Someone's looking for resources on how to successfully blend or braid the funding programs when they have competing or contradictory priorities and requirements. And I'm thinking just off the top of my head, layering may be a better strategy in a case like that, but it also may go back to that question or comment that you read early on, Siobhan, about not structuring your program around the funding, but figuring out what funding fits your program. And also maybe talking to the funding source, leadership themselves to understand the requirements and priorities and make sure they really are competing or contradictory, in case there is a misunderstanding or there's some flexibility you didn't know about. It would be, I'm trying to think of what that might look like. So I think as we think about, from an NCASE perspective, how to create resources that address these kinds of questions. And I think, our other partners and in the field and doing national and local technical assistance, it would be great to know from whoever made that comment, what kinds of funding are you seeing with competing or contradictory requirements? And if you can give us a little more information about where those problems come in. I know one example that comes to mind is the 21st century restriction or I think they really dissuade programs from charging fees, which was contradictory to CCDF at one point, but the new CCDF final rule may be helping in that way. So I guess that's another piece of it, is to make sure that you have the latest understanding of the requirements in case those requirements have changed in ways that can help you.
Thanks so much, everybody. It's about time for us to wrap up, but we did have 2 questions from folks. One person and possibly more asked if we can share the Padlet results with participants in this event, and we'll need to check with our funder to see if we're able to do that. If we are, we will include it with the deck. We just have to be really mindful, because we're a federal contractor, of not sharing any personally identifiable information. So we'll have to check on that. And Preeti, there was a question that you saw. Can you share that one, please? And I think we can take the Padlet down while you're doing that.
Okay, I will stop sharing.
Thank
you, everyone. We have one participant, well, one of our participants is working with a tribal grantee and shared that they're new to their role, but they wanted to get more information around the grants that run their program. And so I know we may not have that specific information, but wondered if there was any guidance as to, how they can find that information, or any insight that our experts could provide.
I think the best support for you would be to connect with the Tribal Capacity Building Center, which is one of the national technical assistance centers that's part of our network. And before we sign off, we can give you the link to contact them. And I'm not sure if this person is with the CCDF lead agency in your tribe, or if you are somebody that works in or runs a program, because that will help us direct you to the right place. So if you'd like to either unmute yourself and answer, or put something in the chat, then we'll help to connect you to the right person.
And Siobhan, I did place a link to the Tribal Childcare Capacity Building Center in the response to Kevin's question. And I would also suggest reaching out to the federal regional office. Kevin, that I didn't see what tribe you're from, but the regional office staff for the Office of Child Care are fantastic. They're always happy to help, even if you're not working with CCDF, they can tell you who in the tribe is running the program there, if there is a program, if there's not, how you might get access to those funds. So they would be a great source, as well as the Tribal Child Care Capacity Building Center.
Oh, great. Thanks, Nina. I didn't realize you already answered the question. Fantastic. Okay, what a team. Okay, so we're going to wrap up. We just have a couple minutes left. All of the resources that were on the slides in today's session are just listed right here for ease of use, and we will share the deck with you after today's event. We'll also send you a link to the webinar recording when it's available. We want to just draw your attention to a couple of NCASE resources from our National Center. We have a resource library that, in addition to including NCASE resources, has many, I think we're up to 450 resources, including tip sheets, webinar archives, briefs, research relating to all topics on out-of-school time from a number of organizations. And there's a link here to that and a QR code. Here's a link to the brief that we shared today, and then also a link to our section of the Child Care Training and Technical Assistance Network website, where we highlight all of our resources. And finally, before we sign off for today, we really appreciate it if you can take a couple of minutes to give us feedback on this event. Let us know if it was helpful to you, if there's more that we could do. We really take your feedback very seriously, and it helps to structure our future events. And Mary's putting a link to the evaluation questionnaire in the chat. And we have a couple more minutes till the top of the hour, and we're wrapped up here. So if you could take those last couple minutes to fill out that feedback, we greatly appreciate it. Again, want to thank all of our panelists for joining us today, and all of you for joining, participating, sharing what you're doing. There's so much great work happening all across the country, and it's really wonderful to get a chance to come together and hear about it. So thank you. And we'll keep the room open for a couple minutes just so folks can get that chat link.